Coming up on Arirang News, Korean firm LG Chem joins with General Motors to open a joint venture in the U.S. that'll make battery cells for GM's new all-electric vehicles. That means jobs for Americans and competitiveness for LG in EV batteries. More optimism for a U.S. China trade deal. President Trump and his Treasury Secretary both say talks are moving ahead, though a deadline is coming up in just 10 days. And North Korea warns President Trump to tone down his rhetoric about military action against the regime and not to restart the name-calling of 2 years ago. It's 4 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for tuning in to Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. A senior North Korean diplomat has warned President Trump over his recent remarks, those suggesting the U.S. might use its military against the North, and his use of the name Rocket Man for Kim Jong-un. If Trump continues to talk like that, the official said, then the North will have to resurrect its own choice epithets. Lee Seung-jae reports.
In a statement carried by the North state-run Korean Central News Agency, North Korea's first Vice Foreign Minister, Choi Sun-hee, said President Trump's remarks hinting at a possible military strike against Pyongyang would pose a very dangerous challenge if they were not made by mistake. Choi added Pyongyang could resume the tit-for-tat name-calling against the U.S. if similar expressions are used again. The senior diplomat said it's more displeasing that Trump referred to the North's leader Kim Jong-un as Rocket Man, an expression the U.S. leader used when they exchanged verbal spats amid heightened tensions in 2017. Attending a NATO summit in London earlier this week, President Trump said Washington could use military force if it must, urging the regime and its leader to honor their agreement to denuclearize, referring to Kim as Rocket Man. Choi says such remarks should be diagnosed as what she called the relapse of the dotage of a dotard. And if any words stoking the atmosphere of confrontation are used once again on purpose at a crucial moment as now. She added that Kim Jong-un has not used any harsh words against President Trump in an effort to prevent the situation getting worse. Choi's remarks come just a day after Park Jong-chun, the chief of the General Staff of the North Korean People's Army, lashed out at President Trump in a separate release, saying the regime will also take prompt corresponding action at any level if the U.S. does indeed use military force against the North. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
A new satellite picture reportedly shows new activity at a launching station at North Korea's Dongchang-ri missile launch site, which has previously been used to test-fire long-range missiles. CNN reported Thursday that it had obtained an image captured by Planet Labs, showing a large shipping container at the facility that was not there several days ago. Seoul's defense ministry declined to comment, but said it's working with the U.S. to closely monitor the North's movements. Local media outlets in South Korea see the picture as showing the North gearing up for a Plan B in case there's no progress in denuclearization talks with the U.S. before the North's unilateral deadline of the end of the year. It seems South Korea and the U.S. still have a lot to work out before they reach a new deal on sharing the costs of American troops stationed here. With Washington reportedly demanding multiples of what Seoul has been paying, an expert warns that could backfire on the Trump administration. Oh Soo-young reports.
Demanding South Korea to pay so much more to keep U.S. troops on the Korean peninsula could end up hurting America's defense industry. That's according to a former commander of UN Command and U.S. Forces Korea. Speaking at a forum in Washington on Thursday, Walter Sharp said South Korea already pays the highest rate of GDP on defense costs among America's allies. He added that if Seoul's contribution towards shared defense costs with the U.S. increases by twofold or even fivefold, it may have to slash its budget for weapons imports. He said this could prompt South Korea to cut its purchases of U.S. military equipment. Sharp warned the U.S. to tread carefully and avoid sacrificing the strength of the alliance over defense costs. Over 4 rounds of talks, the allies have been discussing the Trump administration's request for South Korea to pay more. Despite the fact that the bilateral special measures agreement already raised South Korea's payment by 8.2% this year, Washington is calling on Seoul to raise its contribution to nearly $5 billion in 2020. South Korea's top negotiator said this week's round of talks in Washington did not lead to any specific outcomes.
We have our respective stances, so to narrow our differences, we need to talk it out.
Chong said Thursday that the US is maintaining its position on making requests beyond the current special measures agreement. He added Seoul also hasn't changed its stance that the two sides should negotiate within the framework of their deal. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
South Korea is bidding to host the Winter Youth Olympics in 2024, and if it does, the IOC is willing to discuss North Korea taking part like they did last year in Pyeongyang. Speaking to reporters Thursday after a three-day meeting of the IOC Executive Board in Lausanne, Switzerland, IOC President Thomas Bach said the IOC would be open to North Korea's participation if the circumstances allow it. South Korea's 2024 bid would center around the cities of Pyeongchang and Gangneung, which hosted the Winter Games in 2018. The IOC said Pyeongchang could be formally elected as the host for the 2024 Games at the next IOC session in January. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has announced that the Democrats will start drafting articles of impeachment against President Trump. Quick to respond, Trump said they should go ahead and do it fast so he can get a fair trial. Yoon Jung-min has more.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Thursday that she has asked for articles of impeachment to be drafted against President Trump just a day after 4 constitutional scholars testified at Capitol Hill. Pelosi insisted President Trump had abused his power by soliciting a foreign power, Ukraine, to meddle in the 2020 election. She said that's why she has asked for the House Judiciary Committee chairman to proceed with the impeachment draft, which is expected to be put up for a vote before Christmas.
Our democracy is what is at stake. The president leaves us no choice but to act because he is trying to corrupt, once again, the election for his own benefit. The president has engaged in abuse of power, undermining our national security and jeopardizing the integrity of our elections.
President Trump fired back through Twitter saying the Democrats were trying to impeach him over nothing and claiming that his phone calls with the Ukrainian president were appropriate. Trump urged the Democrats to do the impeachment proceedings quickly so he can have, quote, a fair trial in the Senate and get back to running the country. He added that the impeachment move has only made Republicans become more united than ever. If the draft passes the House, a Senate trial could start as early as January. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The Korean firm LG Chem is joining with General Motors to open a joint venture in the U.S. state of Ohio to make battery cells for electric vehicles. LG Chem said Friday that the two firms will invest 50-50 up to $2.3 billion by 2023. The plant will make battery cells for GM's upcoming range of all-electric vehicles. Construction of the plant is set to begin in mid-2020, and the factory is expected to create more than 1,100 jobs in the city of Lordstown, Ohio, which lost thousands of jobs when GM closed its assembly plant there earlier this year. The new plant's expected to slash battery production costs and strengthen LG Chem's lead in the EV battery sector. The Ohio plant will be LG Chem's second battery-making facility in the U.S., along with its Michigan plant built in 2012. The National Assembly's Land, Infrastructure and Transport Committee has approved a bill that, if passed, would effectively put the local ride-hailing service Tada out of business. Tada is officially a van rental service that comes with a driver, which is allowed under the current law. But the amendment would restrict that to vans that are used for tours that are 6 hours or longer. There would also be limits on pickup and return at airports. Korean taxi drivers have protested against services like Tada, claiming they threaten their livelihoods. Now the revised bill will go to the Judiciary Committee and then to the floor for a vote at this month's plenary session. If passed, companies like Tada will have to end their services after 1 year, followed by a 6-month grace period before they're punished. The United States and China appear to be edging closer to a trade deal. President Trump struck an upbeat tone on trade negotiations with Beijing on Thursday, saying talks are moving right along. His comments came after Chinese officials reiterated their stance that a Phase 1 deal would require the U.S. to roll back some tariffs. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin also said the two sides are actively working toward a deal and that the U.S. is not bound by an artificial deadline. A new round of U.S. tariffs is set to kick in on December 15th, covering about $156 billion of Chinese imports. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Friday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, global strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So a lot of volatility in stocks this week on the mixed messages coming out about the U.S. China trade talks. Trump saying he's willing to wait, and then just today, Steven Mnuchin and Trump saying the talks are on track. So what's the story today in the global markets and your outlook on the near term?
Sure. The President Donald Trump is asking basically China to buy about 40 to 50 billion won worth of farm goods a year, which is significantly higher than 8.6 billion the country bought last year. So because of that, there's continuation negotiation that's happening. So both sides wants to get the better terms for themselves, and that is really making the reason for the delay in the actual deal striking. If you look at the two countries, they are probably most likely to finalize something before the December 15th, because U.S. is saying that if the deals are not struck, then about 15% tariff on 165 billion won worth of Chinese import should be taxed. So if that's the case, then that really will cause a huge problem for both countries. So we think that these two countries are negotiating quite aggressively to that date, and hopefully will come out with something that can can create win-win situation for both countries. Trump also said that something could happen regarding to those tariffs, but added that they're not discussing that yet. And also he believes that trade talks are going well. So overall, I think that this is causing most of the market to be volatile. So until the December 15th, until the actual first stage of the deal is done, until the actual announcement of the tariffs, we think the market will be probably fairly volatile for now. U.S. market was pretty much flat yesterday, and European market was down by very slight amount. As for the Asian market, it seems to be showing some recovery today.
Well, here in Korea, the Kospi has seen foreigners selling off for 21 sessions in a row, more than 5 trillion won worth of shares. It seems they are net buyers, though, in Taiwan and Japan, to name two of them. Today, it looks like the selling continued on the Kospi.
Right. It is quite unfortunate that the 21 days of net selling is actually happening, and that resulting into one of the biggest underperforming market of the world as for this year. The Kospi really is not doing too well, while the Taiwan equity market and Japanese Nikkei are doing all well with the net buying of foreign investors coming in. As you know, the Korea's net selling by the foreign investors were amounting to 5 trillion won, which is a very significant amount of money. The reason for this is because we think that it is a geopolitical risk. And you know that there's a lot of news about U.S. troops might be moving out of Korea due to the cost that the U.S. is asking for Korea, and Korea is talking about these things are too additional cost, which is, really seems to be some noises coming out where between Korea and U.S. are not really getting along that well. And that is definitely a negative news for Korea, for the foreign investors who will be probably cautious in terms of actually purchasing any additional equities of Korea, while they're actually heavily buying of Taiwan as well as Japan, because their relationship are very strong with the U.S. And it seems to be that's causing the whole this uncertainty for Korean equity market. Also, foreign investors looking at Korean equity market with one of the very poor corporate governance market with very low dividend payout ratios, and these are all big concerns for foreign investors. With the high level of taxes, not investment into fourth industrial revolution related industries, and too much regulations are all the risks regarding Korea at this point in time. We think, though, with the U.S. market rising and Chinese market rising, Korean equity market will rise as well after massive selling that has occurred. But, however, though, the upside will be probably limited relative to China or U.S.
Got it. Well, let's look at oil prices for a second. OPEC and its allies, including Russia, have been meeting in Vienna, and they're reportedly considering an additional production cut. What's the near-term outlook for oil prices?
Right. In order for the oil price to rise, we need to see dollar weakening a bit and also the liquidity increasing quite significantly. And we are seeing those factors. You are seeing the liquidity being very ample in financial market and globally. M2 growth rate for U.S. is picking up to 7.5% from bottom of 3.2%. M1 growth rate of Europe is rising over 7% territories, all fitting into the liquidity of the financial market. Now, if the liquidity continues to rise, then oil price are most likely to rise, with the dollar being quite stable, and with the Trump saying a lot of things about dollar, the dollar seems to be fairly stabilizing to the little bit of the weaker side, well below $98. If that's the case, we think that there will be continuation of interest towards the oil. And also, as you said, the OPEC and Russia have decided to cut in terms of the production. And that number is actually another 500,000 barrels per day, which will be added to total of 1.7 million barrels per day production cut. If that continues, then clearly the supply and demand side will indicate that the prices for oil should rise further. However, though, with the high oil prices, then the production by the shale gas companies will rise as well. So we think that in a longer-term basis, oil prices are range-bound. Low end will be $55. High end should be about $65. Right now, it's at about $58. We think that most likely it will go up to $65 over the next 6 months. But that should be the probably ceiling for the price.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, that's where we'll have to leave it on this Friday. Thanks so much for making time today.
Thank you very much.
Now, as we just discussed, OPEC and Russia cutting their oil production, proposing a cut of another 500,000 barrels a day for a total of 1.7 million barrels. The Wall Street Journal reported Thursday that OPEC and Russia suggested the idea at their annual meeting in Austria. On the same day, Russian Energy Minister Alexander Novak confirmed it was discussed, but said it will only be implemented with the agreement of all the parties. The proposal is set to be finalized on Friday with an outline of how much each country will cut. The oil industry has been calling for cuts amid rising concerns of oversupply, which could potentially drag down oil prices by as much as 30% next year. Thousands of workers in France took to the streets on Thursday against President Emmanuel Macron's proposed pension reforms. The Eiffel Tower has been shut down and most of the rail lines in Paris have been disrupted. Our Ji-young has more.
France's largest general strike in decades has shut down large parts of the country in the latest protest against President Emmanuel Macron's pension reform plans. According to French police, more than 800,000 workers nationwide launched a general strike on Thursday, calling for Macron to abandon the reforms. There were even violent clashes between protesters and police in some cities. More than 10 metro lines were closed in Paris, and only 10% of trains operated as railway workers joined the walkout. Many schools were also closed, and about 20% of all flights going into and out of Paris and other large cities have been cancelled. Workers in France are angry about a proposed pension reform, which would see them get reduced payouts or have to retire later. Currently, France's pension plan has 42 separate systems with variations in retirement age and benefits. The official retirement age is currently 62, but some special schemes allow certain public sector workers to retire as early as 50. However, for the sake of equality, French President Emmanuel Macron wants to create a unified system where everyone's pension would be calculated the same way. He aims to implement a points-based system where the employees are awarded points for each day worked, which would be transferred into future pension benefits. The protesters claim they would be shortchanged as the proposed reforms would remove many of the pension benefits for certain jobs like lawyers and railway workers. Ji-young, Arirang News.
In a survey last month about Seoul's city policies, foreigners said the best one is the plan to install free public Wi-Fi throughout the city. According to the Seoul Metropolitan Government, 11,000 foreigners participated in the survey online. Seoul's plan, called S-Net, will allow anyone to use Wi-Fi anywhere in the city by 2022, and it got about 6,200 votes. In medicine, DNA data is helping improve treatment by identifying more individualized needs. For people in Asia, though, the data hasn't been as robust. But now a project led by Korean researchers has released the world's biggest data set of DNA from Asian populations, which should be a big help. Lee Kyung-eun reports.
South Koreans living in the U.S. generally get the same medical treatment as Americans. But because of genetic differences, it might not be as effective on them, and it can even cause side effects. This has led to calls for precision medicine, in which patients are treated according to their DNA. And the sector seems to have great potential thanks to a study published Thursday in the journal Nature. The Genome Asia 100K project, led by South Korean researchers from the biotech company Macrogen and Seoul University Bundang Hospital, have released the biggest ever collection of sequenced DNA from Asia. They analyzed the entire genomes of more than 1,700 individuals from 64 Asian countries, and among nationalities, populations were further broken down by language, geography, and caste where applicable. Then they compared the Asian DNA samples to those from Africa, the Americas, and Europe, demonstrating an unprecedented diversity and scale.
Genome medicine has always focused overwhelmingly on people of European descent. Until 2006, they made up 96% of the data. There was a need for reference DNA data to represent Asians, so we've analyzed the greatest number of Asian individuals ever.
The new data sets have yielded several discoveries, such as highly diverse DNA structures within Asia and migration paths through the region. But the biggest takeaways are the medical applications.
These academic findings should be used in pharmacogenomics and precision medicine in a way that can help people receive treatments that suits them best and that can prevent the diseases that they're most prone to. This will reduce treatment costs drastically.
For example, the study shows that East Asians should be more cautious with warfarin, a commonly used anticoagulant, because their DNA makes it more prone to an allergic response to the drug. Such advanced healthcare will benefit more than 4.4 billion people of Asian heritage, who account for nearly 60% of the world's population. The new data sets will also help South Korea take the initiative in genome biomedicine so they can become a major player in the highly promising sector. Lee Kyung-eun, Arirang News.
South Korean researchers have recently developed a way to run trains on wireless electricity. This method would use only 30% of the energy trains need currently and could be applied to Korea's high-speed trains as soon as 2022. Jo Sung-min reports.
Wireless charging technology has changed the way we use our electronic gadgets. Now it's found its way into transportation thanks to researchers at the Korea Railroad Research Institute who've succeeded in applying the technology to trains. The developers have built wire-free electromagnetic rails, and trains that run on them have devices that automatically collect and harness the energy. The devices use batteries that deliver the electricity needed to propel the train forward, and they store any power left over. Using this method, the developers were able to operate the train at a maximum speed of 50 kilometers per hour. Plus, it only uses 30% of the energy needed by existing trains.
The train takes energy from the rails when leaving a station, saving its battery power in those intervals. So there's no power leakages when the train stops. The power doesn't run out, even though it makes the whole trip.
It also costs less to install the technology since it doesn't need wires or other infrastructure. Developers say if applied to subways, it could reduce tunnel costs by 5%.
We could drastically cut down the cost of building tunnels for the subway since we wouldn't need any wires. This technology will take the railroad business to another level.
Researchers will continue polishing the technology before applying it to high-speed trains, including the KTX, starting in 2022. Jo Sung-min, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.
(2016년 9월 28일)